for?
It's Bob Flaws, and on today's little YouTube video, I'd like to talk about a line from Sun Si-miao, where the famous Tang Dynasty doctor says that he'd rather treat 10 men than one woman and 10 women rather than one baby. And the reason I want to talk about this is this saying is an often quoted saying, but it shows how Chinese medicine has evolved, and that although it's important to be familiar with the pre-modern literature, the idea of basing one's practice entirely on the pre-modern literature would be in my experience, a huge mistake. Why did Sun Si-miao said he'd rather treat 10 men than one woman? Well, this is because women have this whole other side to their life, their menstrual cycle. And therefore they have symptoms and issues that men don't have. They have their menses and all of the things that can go wrong with menstruation. They have all of the conditions that go along with being pregnant, all of the conditions that go along with being postpartum. Then they have, of course, their menopausal complaints when the menstruation ceases. So Sun thought that all this made for way too much complexity, and that men, because they don't have any of this, were preferable to treat. At the time that Sun said this in the Tang Dynasty, there had yet to be written the first full textbook on Chinese medical gynecology. Chinese medical gynecology, although there were chapters on gynecology in the books leading up to Sun, certainly Chinese gynecology was not developed. It hadn't evolved to the place where it is today in the 21st century. So literally, Sun was working with less information and less complete, less sophisticated understanding of women's problems than what exists today. For me, as a 21st century Chinese medical gynecologist, that being my specialty, I would say absolutely, totally the opposite. I would love to treat 10 women for every man that comes in the door. If you know how to read the menstrual cycle, how to read the menses themselves, the color, the consistency, the quantity of the blood, if you understand how to treat gestational and postpartum diseases, then really this is very easy. In fact, you have this whole other group of information that you can use to diagnose your patients with. Whereas men lack all that information, and then, of course, men don't ever tell you truly what's going on. They wait too long. They don't come and seek help. When they do come and seek help, usually it's when absolutely they can't avoid it any further. So their situation is either acute and needs first aid, or it's become very chronic and very complex, very far along and difficult to treat. And then they don't tell you everything that's going on either. You ask a question, how's your digestion? Well, I don't know, I guess it's okay. And how's your bowel movements? And oh yeah, you know. And they're not forthcoming either, because they literally are unconscious of these things. They don't, not paying any attention to it, or they're not used to sharing the details of their personal life with other people. Whereas women not only have all this other information that you can use, but they are generally, in my experience, quite willing to talk about their bodily functions, and are not reticent in the way that men are, and they tend to come for treatment sooner in the course of their condition. So for all these reasons, I think Sun was wrong. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Sun Si-miao. On some days, you might even catch me thinking that I'm an incarnation of Sun Si-miao, that I lived as Sun Si-miao in a previous life. So I have great respect for Sun. I have visited his hermitage. I've visited and burnt incense and done prostrations at his temple in Shanxi province. But on this particular issue, Sun just wasn't working with the full information that we have today. And so, I think gynecology is a wonderful specialty to work with. I think it's a relatively an easy specialty to work with. And two, I think this whole issue shows how Chinese medicine has developed, and that if we were stuck with the Chinese medicine as it existed back in the Tang Dynasty, we would not be playing with a full deck of cards. So that's what I have to say about Sun Si-miao and his famous statement, rather treat 10 men than one woman.